Officer. We'll use the term COO for Chief Operating Officer, otherwise we'll be saying Chief Operating Officer for the next 20 minutes non-stop. And Steve's the COO at Southport and Ormskirk, up on the northwest coast, kind of above Liverpool, and he's a Liverpool football fan as well, but we'll not stray into that kind of territory. Steve, are you there? Steve, unmute yourself.
Yeah.
You there, Steve?
You'd think by now we'd mastered the art of digitalisation, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Steve, afternoon, mate. That's not happened at all during the last 6 months, has it? Somebody coming on a call and having to be told to unmute themselves, has it?
So I'll commit to this session, Tim. If you don't talk about the derby, let's just leave that.
Yeah, let's leave football. Let's leave football. It serves my purposes as well. It's great to see you, mate. We want to talk a bit about your life as a COO and what the experience has been like over the last 6 months or so, but generally what it's like to be a Chief Operating Officer in the NHS. But you've got a bit of an interesting background, haven't you? I mean, you're incredibly young, Steve, aren't you? You know, and I can't quite see your hair on there, but it has gone a little bit grey over the last year or two, which might be related to the COO role. But you're incredibly young, and you've had a really interesting career, and you've got to where you wanted to get to. Tell us a bit about your background.
Yeah, less about the grey hair.
I can't talk about hair, Steve. You go for it.
Indeed. It was. I went for a visit around our paediatric A&E this morning to see the guys, to see how they were. And one of the nurses, she was quietly whispering to a colleague, which I overheard, when, look what COVID's done to Steve. He's gone grey. So that's what COVID's done to me in my journey. In terms of background, just really simple. Graduate management trainee, post obviously, formal education routes via university, etc. And then following the grad scheme, I went on to take a number of senior operational roles across both commissioning and the provider landscape. I reached a point, probably 10 years into my career, of sort of deputy director status, with a view that at that stage I may then go into an executive role. However, I felt at that stage there was a need to broaden my portfolio and gain greater exposure and experience of the wider sort of landscape of health and care provision. So I sort of moved across into the regulatory sort of landscape, and within that specifically on service improvements. So for 5 years I worked with NHS England, with ESIST, which were fond memories, and then equally with the North region under the leadership of Lynn Simpson at the time, to support service improvement and transformation. Following that, an ambition was always to come back into the provider arm, which I took on the COO role at Southport and Ormskirk. And 2 years to the day, I joined this organisation and still sit in this office here and now.
Brilliant! Happy anniversary! Happy anniversary! So I think a lot of people have done that kind of route, haven't they? The traditional up route, and then moving out of the provider world. I mean, as you know, I did that too. That's kind of an interesting thing and gives you lots of different exposure. And like you say, in teams like ESIST and the regional teams, you get to see lots of different organisations, different setups, different cultures. But I'm particularly interested in your work in improvement, Steve. So, you know, knowing the work that you did with ESIS, but then absolutely fantastic work as well with the North region, particularly on urgent care, bringing teams together. The Action on A&E programme that you chaired and coordinated was just fantastic stuff. How did that move out of the provider world into improvement? How did that kind of change you and form you and help you in terms of the role you're in now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, and I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna just talk to this. I suppose one of the key elements, it was with Pete Gordon actually, that Pete and I connected up with a professional that we all know in Helen Bevan, and through my improvement sort of period with NHSE, there was one thing that really stayed true with me, and it really shaped and redefined my leadership and my approach in leading teams, and that was sort of understanding new power currency. And if colleagues aren't aware of that, I'd absolutely advise and recommend having a look at that publication. It's the author's Henry Timms, and essentially what new power is, it's a shift of sort of leadership approaches in terms of sort of that top-down hierarchical method to more of a shared, open, inclusive, and participatory one. So if we just go into that, all power, and this is what I was seeing within my NHS career before I moved into improvement. I noted leadership styles of sort of institutionalization. It was very sort of transactional, command and control, and top down, and quite closed. So it was for the few rather than the many. Whereas when I got into the notion of working with sort of the improvement and transformation leads of the health sector, new power was introduced to me, which was more about, rather than controlling power, more about channeling it as a current, and it was more about sort of shared principles, looking at sort of the word that Helen used was radical transparency, building rapport and relationships, creating power for many, not few, and pulling it in. So creating sort of social movements and coalitions rather than sort of creating hierarchy and sort of controlled environments. So throughout my improvement sort of career, and then moving into the COO role, I've really challenged myself and my approach to start thinking about new power rather than sort of old power. And that got me sort of working on sort of different types of approaches. And I think before I went into improvement, I was very much a senior leader that almost came across as a firefighter. So, you know, I felt it was my duty and my daily sort of task was to just put out fires and take that sort of hero approach.
And I did exactly that, mate. My similar to yours, but it gives you a kick, doesn't it? It gives you a hit. It gives you a satisfaction.
Oh, it does. You high five yourself at the end of the day, thinking you've achieved something, when actually it's pretty transactional. It doesn't achieve a great deal. And I think with really learning that new power mindset and leadership quality, it started to get me to think more about, rather than be a firefighter, what type of character would you want to set yourself up as? And I've started to build myself up as a farmer.
I know that one.
That's more about setting sort of the right conditions to allow what I would call your people, your harvest, your crops, to nurture, grow, and realize their true potential. So again, back to new power, it's about that sort of building the relationships and making it with a shared network and really creating the right conditions to deliver sustainable improvements. Whereas as a firefighter, I wasn't building those conditions. I was just reacting and being quite transactional. So that firefighter to farmer transition in terms of my leadership through the experience of going through the improvement sort of portfolio has really, I think, helped me and set me up to be the most effective COO that I can possibly be. I think last point on this, and we will move on, is I think it's also changed my perception in terms of how I should act as a leader to my team to influence and bring about positive change that's sustainable. So I think previously I would almost over plan. I'd set project groups up and create sort of governance and bureaucracy where we just couldn't get anything over the line. Whereas now I really try and develop conditions again whereby we give permission and time to allow our clinical experts to give things a go and build those conditions where people don't need to ask for permission really. They've got the autonomy to go for it, and I'll hold them by it to account, but I'll hold them and work and support them every step of the way. I'll leave that there. That's
quite brave, though, isn't it, Steve? That's quite it's fascinating stuff. You know, I agree with and familiar with the stuff that you talked about. But to actually do that in the real world, it's easy for us who are a bit at arm's length to kind of to advocate for those kind of approaches. But to take it on in the radical way that you have at Southport and Ormskirk is quite a brave thing to do, isn't it? When there's all the drive for improvement, there's a drive for performance. As lots of organisations, yours is a fairly small trust, isn't it? And has the challenges that brings in terms of recruitment, retention, balancing performance. Little shifts in numbers can make a big difference. Did it feel like a brave thing to do, or was it just the way you were going to do it anyway?
It was the way I was going to do things, and I suppose I had to choose carefully what the right organisation for me more, as well as the organisation, I'm being right for the organisation. And that's important in any process, isn't it? That you've got to be able to align yourself to the corporate values, visions, and aspirations of the organisation. What was really positive for me is there was a catalyst for change. 2 years ago to the day, it was a challenge provider in special measures, and only last week we've had the formal announcement that we're coming out of challenge provider status, which is excellent and a massive accolade to the great work from the teams of this organisation. And it was the people of the organisation that allowed me to be the farmer and not the firefighter and go with the flow. And with that, we've really developed a different way of doing things here in terms of culture and behaviour that work very true to the value base that we've committed to here in scope values. I won't go through that, don't test me. So I suppose I was given permission by the chief exec to give this a go, but more importantly, I developed a coalition around me that truly believed that this was the right approach. And the clinical experts, who are the people that drive the change, really brought into this. And by co-design and working in that sort of coalition effort, we've really demonstrated that it can be done. And I think the notion of coming out of challenge provider status is an evidence base of that.
That's fabulous to hear. Fabulous. In terms of kind of to bring it into the current COVID situation and the challenges that you've experienced in 2020 and the inevitability of, you know, as we move into what's looking increasingly like wave 2 and is really wave 2. How's that been working as a COO in this year, which has been completely different with different challenges to every year that we've had?
Yeah, another good question, one that I'm not prepared for. So
right
for me,
I'm gonna give it you, Steve.
I'm gonna you're getting me back, Tim. I'm going to talk about personal endeavour and resilience. As a leader, you know, people look to you, don't you, to have the answers and to be the one who's showing strength and confidence and conviction at times of challenge. And I think what I've encouraged myself to do, and I think and my team around me, is to accept and be vulnerable. We've all not got the answers, and actually by working together and being open and honest on that, and really allowing us to be vulnerable with each other as a team has really allowed us to get the best out of each other over this really difficult time. So vulnerability in leadership is something that I would encourage, and it's something that's really put me well in this last 6 months, because being vulnerable allows you to develop the real relationships that are underpinned by trust and honesty and openness. A secondary to that is resilience outside of work. So you've got to have a good network around you and utilize and capitalize on that. So, you know, I've got 2 young ones and a wife, and they've been supportive throughout this. And I can't, you know, they've been my backbone, and they've kept me going. So, you know, I've made sure that when the schools were open, at least once a week, I took my kids to school. And that's important for them, but equally more so for myself. It makes me positive, and it keeps me in good moods as I go into work. And equally, I test out ideas with my 2 kids, and believe it or not, 5-year-old and 4-year-old have got better answers than me, and they come up with the solutions. So testing myself out with my kids is fantastic, actually. But taking the kids to school once a week has been invaluable, and more importantly, keeping up with routine. So go in the gym, and also I coach an under-6 football team, and I was going to let that go at the start of COVID, but I made a commitment to keep going, and it's been fantastic. So keeping consistent on what you do outside work, support your personal resilience in work is a key sort of message I would take on this. And the last thing on that
that's
is
really brave, Steve. Yeah.
The last thing, the third point on this one is you're always in the hustle and bustle here in Goal Command and supporting the team, but I've made an effort again to take time out. So I take 20 minutes out, regardless of what I'm doing and where we're up to go for a walk, get some open space and just reflect. And I've continued that. And when I see others struggling and they've had a difficult day, guess what? They come on the walk with me, and we talk about things outside of work. But when we talk about things outside of work, you can connect those discussions with work-related practice, and we get our best ideas and solutions through that time that we have. So yeah, three examples there that I hope resonate with colleagues.
That's really good to hear, Stephen. I think that's fantastic advice that people can people can really take something away from. I think that relates back to the talk of new power, doesn't it? And we talked a bit about bravery, and again, I was thinking what you're saying there was really brave, but not in that traditional male macho kind of way. And we're both big butch blokes, aren't we? So we could really get drawn into the macho side of bravery, but actually the bravery to be vulnerable and to have the humility, I guess, and the confidence to a point to be able to say, look, I've not got all the answers here. We've got the answers. Our brains are greater together, aren't they, than anyone individual. And it's not really, it doesn't build resilience in a system, does it, to have to go to one person for the answer all the time, when actually true leadership in the modern sense that we want, that people like us want to do it, is really about empowering your teams and thinking like a farmer and nurturing your crops and what have you, and watering and feeding and all those things that come on all those great slides. So absolutely fascinating stuff, this, Steve. We've only got another 4 minutes, so I'll just ask you one more question. Well, a couple more questions, I guess. One of the things I'm interested in is ops teams and things like site management, COOs, general managers. We talk about the front line, don't we, the NHS, or the media does, and we all know, those who are working it, that this is a team sport, isn't it? And I think a lot of us, potentially, who don't work on the front line anymore, have felt a bit fraudulent to a degree, in that we're not quite contributing in the same way. And when people clap for the NHS and carers, it's been about nurses and doctors and therapists and other allied health professionals and social workers who are doing the doing. What's been the contribution of the ops teams, of your general managers, of your site teams and people like that?
Invaluable. And I think what's fascinating is actually a measure of that is that the clinical teams all wrote out to our operational management team to thank them and acknowledge their work ethic. The ops teams working with the teams keep the hospital safe, and they've been invaluable in this effort. And I think, just to give an example of that, is the simple stuff that you don't think about in terms of redeployments. So they've led on the redeployment strategy. We've had real challenges in terms of patient visiting restrictions, and the ops teams have been putting methodologies and practices in place to ensure that we can connect with our wider communities where we've had to restrict the traditional working arrangements. So invaluable. Equally, through patient flow, we've set up different ways in which we manage the flows. And again, I won't go through the examples, but I can offer loads out whereby the team have stepped up and demonstrated their contribution towards the COVID effort through a number of different ways, but importantly through staff wellness and well-being, and also patient engagement and experience. And there's many examples which I'll be really happy to share. But the testament to the ops team is they've been recognised and acknowledged by the clinical teams.
And that's always good, isn't it? I think that's always the testament, isn't it? If you get that recognition of the contribution that they're making from your clinical teams, that's praise indeed.
Another practical example, just to give one, sorry, because I'm conscious of time, is just ward liaison officers. So the ops team came in and stepped in when there was issues in staffing gap provision, where the team would come and be a WLO and support with the ward in terms of administration, which again is just a classic practical example where teams stepped up and redeployed into the areas that needed their help.
And brilliant as well, the ward liaison officer role for the teams who are doing it. So if you're from HR or finance, for example, to see firsthand the clinical services that you're supporting, and really helps to understand the contribution that you can make as well, doesn't it? That's brilliant. Steve, we could have talked, I've got a load of questions here that we've not got to, and I kind of hoped and knew that would be the case. It's been brilliant to chat with you. We could have done an hour quite easily, couldn't we? A lot of take-home messages there, particularly for me, around the new power stuff. Let's really urge people, and there's some links in the chat box that people can use to get to the new power stuff. And that point about brave leadership isn't what people would have traditionally thought it was. It's the bravery to be vulnerable, the bravery to take time for yourself as well. Last word for you, Steve.
Think like a farmer, not a firefighter.